Right, I see the appeal. Look at this place. Bonkers. Should be fun. This tip is probably the most important, yet least spoken about, that I see anyway. If you're interested in ultra cycling, then you're in the right place. The videos I make are about ultra cycling, training, kit, and adventures. As well as this particular video, I'll be racing 1,000 kilometers in about 3 weeks, and then the transcontinental race about 4,000 kilometers in a couple of months. So subscribe and follow along. But in this particular video, I want to show people that riding a bike all day long is not a skill that you're born with and something that people should be afraid of. If you follow a few simple steps, it can be a really good day out on your bike. You can have a really good adventure. And to prove the point, I'm going to do a long ride whilst I give the advice. I'm going to ride 200 miles out to Cheddar Gorge and back. Pretty savage climb. And along the way, I'm going to give the top 10 things that I think will help you and others to have a really good day on your bike. A good long day. So enough waffle from me. Let's go for a ride. Welcome back to Ultra Saturday. Well, not so much, but it is Saturday and I've got a really long training ride planned for today. So I'm currently about 50 miles in. The route's been really busy, so filming's been really tough. Sometimes the realities of filming this stuff while doing it, it's pretty difficult. It's probably why there aren't many people that do. It has been gorgeous so far. I've just ridden through the city, all the boring stuff, then through the New Forest. Ponies seem to be very active today. Gorgeous there. And the weather is perfect. Very little wind. I think I got a slight headwind, but it's minimal. But the sun and the temperature is ideal. I don't think I've ever ridden this way. If I got my bearings right, when I ride through Salisbury out to Bristol, I'm pretty sure I'm on the other side of Cranbourne Chase. Cranbourne Chase is pretty hilly, so let's see what we get. But the plan is today to do this ride, 200-mile training ride. And while I'm doing this ride, I want to cover off a question I've been asked probably more than any others, maybe, how to ride ultra. And that's a bit of a difficult question in itself. What even is ultra? There's no set figures, distances. It's kind of subjective. But in my mind, I have a rough idea of what I think ultra is. This is really just my opinion, but for me, the levels of riding I see: club riding, so 50-60 miles, some elevation, cafe stop, club riding. Endurance, go out for a longer day, probably about 100 miles, with a mixed terrain or some elevation in there. But that's what most people, I think, consider endurance. Then we have ultra distance, and I think it's pretty difficult to put a number on that. You could try to maybe say something like 150 miles, 200 miles plus in one long effort, something like that maybe. Once you get beyond multiple days, you're into bike packing really. Still ultra, but I'd say that's more bike packing. And the reason I think it's really not as simple as distance, I've been on plenty of century rides, 100 miles or so, with such challenging conditions that it definitely pushes it into ultra endurance. Look at the Fred Whitten route. I've ridden that route. Distance wise, it's not much more than 100 miles, but it is brutal. Basically, every notable mountain pass in one of the most mountainous national park in England. It's pretty brutal. So I class that as ultra endurance for sure. I've been on rides where it's rained so much wind, so much more energy, putting up with so much discomfort. Those rides, they might not be much more than 100 miles at times. I'd class them as ultra endurance quite often because they're hard work and you're out for a long time. But anyway, this is just my view on ultra. It is a bit subjective. If you clicked on this video, then you're probably riding endurance already and looking to up your distances this year, or maybe it's just in your future and you're interested in learning how ultra works. And I'm leaving no doubt on this one, really. 200 miles, a fair bit of elevation, long day, out to one of the hardest climbs in England and back. So this is ultra for me. There are probably people who disagree with that. I'm climbing now too, so a bit out of breath, but I can't afford to stop to film this. So, oh well. But the purpose of this video is basically a follow-on from a previous one I made, by far the most popular one that I've put up. That was how to ride your first century. In that video, I basically went over all of my mistakes, things I've learned over the years in endurance. So I'd say, if you're at that point and you want to ride your first century, watch that one. It should be really helpful. Loads of Spitfires for some reason. I've seen 3 now. Oh, that's not a Spitfire. But if you've ridden a few centuries, you want to take things to the next level, then this will be for you. I feel like I've been climbing for ages now. So basically, along this route, I'm going to give my own top 10 things that I'd consider. Someone sat down and asked me the things I'd consider. This is my top 10. Well, it's taken me so long to film this, I'll start with my number 1. Tip number 1 is to be really clear on why you're out doing what you're doing. Yes, this was in the previous video, but it's even more important now. If you haven't considered why you're about to put yourself through this, when you hit those really tough times and you ask yourself, what am I doing? You won't have an answer. And that's quite tough. I've been there. You roll past the train station with a few hours to go, busy train station, you could jump straight on that train. You need to know why you're doing it. And if it's just for the coups and Strava, or that kudos, probably it's not going to help you. So that's my tip number 1. Worth the climbing. That was a fun descent. Pretty tight. Kind of like fitting an alpine climb into 1 mile. A lot of fun. Zigzag Hill, Dorset. Must remember that name. We're about 70 miles in now. All that climbing back there, that was Cranbourne Chase, so that makes sense. So, tip number 2. Now this is probably an obvious one, but maybe not so much. Route planning. Up your route planning game. If you're traveling 100 miles, chances are you're not going that far from home. Maybe routes you know already, maybe you are going a bit further afield. As soon as you up the distance to 150, 200 miles, you end up a lot further from home. Where I'm heading today, I've never been. Never been out to the Mendip Hills. So I would spend a bit more time on your route. Try to maybe follow a train route in case you get in real trouble. Think about shops, resupply. Maybe look at route planning software that has a heat map feature. You can see where everybody rides. Think about where you're going to be and at what time. If you're going to be riding through an area 9 PM, 10 PM, you can roughly estimate that. And if you're going to be riding through lots of small villages, little village shops are going to be closed. So think about that. And on top of that, try to make it fun. Go somewhere interesting, ride an event that's interesting. I'm heading today to Cheddar Gorge. I've heard of it, seen it, never been there. It's a long climb, one of the hardest in England apparently. So I want to go check that out. So doing something like that can make it far more fun and interesting. Having a goal or a target to hit. That's my tip number 2. As a side note, I'm starting to get sore now. So there you go. 70 miles in, starting to hurt. That tends to pass for me, so I'll come on to that in a little bit. But yeah, it's not easy. Yeah, if it was easy, everyone would be doing it. pretty brutal climb, but the whole road is lined with wild garlic. It smells amazing. Climb complete. Oh, that was quite tough. That's climb 1 of 6 apparently. I think maybe like 85 miles in. I think not too far from Cheddar now. The turning round point. Hopefully we get a nice descent now. Tip number 3, kind of doing this in an order that makes some sense. When you have an idea of what your event's going to be, or what the route's going to be, build up to it. You might be in a position where you're riding endurance fairly often. To jump to 200 miles or further, still do you a bit of mischief. And once again, this is something I learned the hard way, so feel free to learn from my mistakes. I was riding endurance fairly often, pushed a bit too much, and injured my knee. And it means weeks off the bike. Potentially a huge interruption to your training. You don't really want that. So if you know well in advance what you've got planned, when it falls, roughly what it entails, then build up. I had to go for physio in the end, get my knee sorted, and it worked out in the long term. It was a massive pain. And after that, I found a plan online. I tried to put a picture up of it. Can't remember how many weeks, but I basically built up gradually, up a couple of weeks, back a week, up a couple of weeks, back a week, until I could ride 200 miles for my event pain-free. And it worked. So feel free to learn from my mistakes. Don't do what Andy does. Don't do what Andy did. Build up gently. Please don't injure yourselves. And on that subject, almost 90 miles in now, starting to feel a little bit chafe, a little bit, but not too bad. My backside of my hands, it's mostly the heat. Temperature's building up, mid-20s roughly, and when that happens, the inflammation just gets worse. Just have to put up with this, it's a bit annoying more than anything. No idea if you can see that on the horizon. I can see Glastonbury Tower. It's a really cool place actually. That's a lot of fun. Glastonbury is obviously where the festival happens. That's a long way from my house. Onwards to Cheddar. Can you guess what Cheddar's famous for? Cheddar. Move. I see the appeal. Look at this place. Bonkers. Should be fun. Trying to burst my eardrum. Joke's on him. I like cars. Hey, he should have my jersey. Nice. The green profile is so misleading. It's not 15%, but bloody hell. Come on. Done. 100 miles in the legs. No stopping, really. Once or twice. Traffic lights and all that kind of stuff, and got some water. That's halfway around. Rolling through Cheddar. That was the 100-mile mark. Now 103 miles. So I got 99. Well, if that wasn't perfect timing, that was my camera dying. I knew it needed charging soon, but it died on me just after the top. I don't know how people can drive to this place and be in a bad mood. And on top of that, you drive into Cheddar Gorge on a bank holiday weekend. You think it's going to be quiet? No. Anyway, I'm feeling pretty good. A bit tired. I'm at the top of the Mendip Hills, so otherwise not too bad. The Cheddar Gorge climb. There was another Garmin climb, categorised by Garmin somehow, straight after. So I think I'm at the highest point of the Mendip Hills. About 97 miles to get home, roughly. Done about 6,000 feet elevation. And according to Komoot, I had about 8,500 to do overall. So if that's true, should be a pretty fun ride home. To be honest, it segues straight into point number 4. Have you heard of a term called range anxiety? EV owners, Tesla owners, they get anxiety, they run out of charge, can't get home. Well, I think there's a cycling equivalent that I've had. The devices you're using to navigate, to be seen, have a finite battery life. And my Garmin, it's an 830, it's good for about 200 miles. So I know when I get home, it's going to be probably going into battery save mode. And I'm okay with that because I know my way home. And if there's any issues, I can charge it. So always bring a little power bank as a backup. And be careful with it. I dropped one off the back of my bike once and a tractor drove over it, so I was a bit screwed. But it's just extra stress. At the end of a ride, when you've got a couple hours left, you're knackered, you don't be worrying about your Garmin dying on you. The stress of trying to find your way home. So, if I remember the route correctly now, we're at the top of the Mendip Hills. I'm pretty sure we rolled all the way down. So I'll put this camera on charge. We'll resume shortly. Welcome back. All charged up. At about 125 miles now, roughly. And just going into another climb. Great. I just spent the last hour or so trying to get a few miles ticked off. So I reckon probably about 5 or 6 hours left maybe. Depends on what kind of pace I can keep. But the profile looks like it's all downhill. It ain't, but it's a lot more downhill than it was on the way out. So it should be a bit nicer. Clouds are looking a bit ominous. I've been getting hammered by these little bugs a lot. I think they're what we call in the UK thunderbugs. They're like little beetles. There's loads of them. Just passed through Froome. Like Chris, a bit slow. If we weren't for all the cars, I might actually get somewhere. Legs so far feeling pretty good. And this will segue into the next point. I won't take my hands off because it's windy. But tip number 5 is going back to diet. Hugely important. But far more important when you go into long days. Fueling for a century is one thing. Fueling for a 12-13 hour ride, very different. And it will make all the difference to how you feel. For me, bear with me. That's the last climb dealt with, according to Garmin. So, all downhill from here. Anyway, diet, for me, starts the day before. Really big dinner, lots of carbs and fats, all the good stuff. Yesterday, I made a really good pasta bake. Lovely. Made some overnight oats. I don't want to be thinking about breakfast at 6 a.m. So just have that ready to go. Yeah, have some overnight oats ready to go, shovel that down in the morning, and just focus on the fueling throughout the ride. And with a ride as long as this, it's got to be quite regimented. You don't have to. You're going to enjoy yourself far more. You're going to have much better legs, much less pain and discomfort. It can be quite difficult to be that disciplined. Look at that. Hope I'm not going too close to that. It can be quite tough. I set an alarm on my Garmin. Every half an hour it goes off, and I eat. I eat a bar, some sort of cereal bar. I packed tons for today. Packed some sausage rolls. I have half a sausage roll. But as long as I eat every half an hour, I'll feel pretty good. If I start slipping on that, it starts to feel pretty terrible. At the moment, I've got Dr. Pepper in my bottles, but it's 50-50 with water. And that really helps. Another climb. Yeah, the constant sugar and caffeine really helps. And generally I find when the pain and discomfort creeps in, sugar and caffeine almost always helps it. It's a bit of a cliched saying about really long races, that they're eating competitions, with some cycling thrown in for fun. And I can believe it. If you really try and eat the amount you need, it is tough. And speaking of hard work, filming this at the same time as doing the ride is actually quite a challenge. So I'm hoping all of this is actually usable and it comes together at the end, but I'll see. If you're finding this remotely not boring, maybe even useful, then consider subscribing for more of the same rubbish. I'll probably, at the end, I'll do some analysis of this ride too. So if you're into numbers, a bit of a geek like I am, then stick around for that. Don't really know where I am. promising, doesn't it? Okay, I'm going to call it there, folks. I'm editing this video and up to about half an hour, which is long enough, I think, for the first half. There's a lot of ground to cover, both in miles and in the tips that I want to share. So I'm going to break it into two. So if you subscribe and follow, in the next few days, I'll share the second half. There's still half the tips left to get through, and probably some of the more important ones. Plus, I've got to get home yet on this ride, so you'll be able to see for yourself how these tips help to get around a 200-mile course. So stick around, keep your eyes peeled. In the next few days, I'll put the second half up. So look after yourselves, and I'll see you all soon.